Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 6 of season 3 of Babylon 5, Dust to Dust. Sheridan gets caught up in a night watch issue between a shop owner and a member of security, not for the first time this week. Now Sheridan notes there's a difference between having a go at the office of the president and having a go at the president himself, the latter being okay. This off the back of events and voices of authority, of course, with Clark now being the subject of Senate hearings. Sheridan basically tells the officer to back off, having been puzzled at what orders he thinks he's following given Sheridan hasn't heard of any. In Garibaldi's office, Ivanova arrives to join him for a conversation with our favourite psychop, Mr. Bester. He's due in 7 hours, quoting as ever a threat to the station, Earth and life as we know it as the reason for his visit. It turns out he may not be blowing smoke, as a lurker goes berserk on someone with a metal pipe he's just torn out of the station in Down Below. So the clock's ticking and Sheridan has called the 7R group together, because this would be a very bad time for Mr. Bester to be nosing around inside their heads from both a Shadows and a Clark Santiago point of view. And given the Ministry of Peace's activities, he may well be even less inclined than usual to follow the normal Psychor rules against unauthorised scanning, as Ivanova explains to Delenn. Garibaldi figures it's either them or him, but Franklin objects to the idea of killing him, at which Ivanova asks, "Can we wound him? Just a little?" No, not on Sheridan's watch. Delenn may have a third option, but it isn't risk-free. Veer comes back onto the station garbed in a delightful Minbari ceremonial jacket. Londo asks if they talk about him on Minbar. He's never been. Veer says only behind closed doors. Apparently it's very clean there. The religious caste are very lovely, the warrior caste not so much. The berserk lurker is now in Medbay, and a seemingly unrelated individual is brought in. Seemingly, because the lurker had been talking about a mountain falling on him, and the other person is a Mars geologist who was caught in a landslide recently. Which leads Franklin to conclude, as his colleague did, that they may be dealing with a drug known as dust. Interestingly, dust was mentioned way back in The Gathering when Babylon 5 first started, but we don't know anything about it. We're probably about to, given the name of the episode. As Bester approaches the station, Ivanova orders the command deck cleared for maintenance, and proceeds to leave Bester's ship hanging while she arms the forward section of the defence grid, although I'd quibble it isn't a forward-facing gun that powers up, but anyway. She basically talks herself into firing, saying the others don't understand the call like she does, given her very personal experience with them. She actually issues the order to fire, but Sheridan is just in time to belay the order, saying that Delenn's plan will work. He says they have to fight them without becoming them. So Bester's ship resumes its course to dock, and interestingly he tells the security guard he was aware of being in danger, but not how exactly. The guard literally doesn't know anything about it and has him escorted to the captain, whereupon he is met by the command crew and the crew of Minbari telepaths. As a group we're told they're enough to block him, although he does try and provoke Garibaldi about Talia to get a line into his head through his emotion, which Ivanova warns him against. Bester suggests her program is long since over, but also intimates she might have suffered a nasty end at Psychor's hands. So it looks like a stalemate, because they can't operate like this, so Sheridan gives it to Bester straight up, in preference to polite. Neither side trusts the other, and both have varying degrees of dirt on each other. So the solution is for Franklin to hit Bester with the drug the Corps used to block the talents of those who don't want to join the Corps, which means he'll be unable to scan anyone for the duration of his visit. He makes out they're being super paranoid, of course, but says the sleeper drug will take effect in 3 hours, so he'll see them in 4 to get on with the job in hand. Londo has enlisted Delenn to mediate in a dispute with the Drazi, which is interesting. The Centauri are after the buffer zone they talked about after they completed their Narn campaign, but it seems their ask has gone up from 2 worlds to 7 from the Drazi, which enrages them, of course. Londo even reminds them of what was done to the Narn homeworld. The meeting breaks down, but Veer remains with Delenn and Lanier. Delenn says one side is frightened, the other foolish, and Veer notes it's hard to say which is which. He wishes Londo would go to Minbar to get a sense of peace, but Lanier says that a problem of the heart cannot be solved by moving the body. They seem to view Londo as a lost cause, but Veer clings to optimism. Bester is briefing the command crew on the dust problem, and believes its manufacturer is on the station looking to expand its market to other worlds for weaponized use. Apparently it allows a user to telepathically rape the target by awakening the user's latent telepathy for a few hours, allowing them to relive the target's entire life, which is a highly addictive experience. However, Bester says that although a normal person recovers from being targeted relatively easily, a telepath's mind is seriously damaged thereafter. So it's not just a planetary security that's at stake for him. Franklin notes that there have now been several confirmed uses of the drug on the station in the past few days, far more than ever before, and there had been none in the last 6 months, so it seems likely something has changed. Elsewhere, Jakar is meeting with said dust manufacturer Mr. Lindstrom, and it seems he's been making side sales that Jakar had asked him not to while negotiations were ongoing with Jakar. Jakar wants to test the merchandise. Apparently it works by speeding up neural processing and acting on the latent telepath gene, and he does caution Jakar that it may not work well on non-humans, although it could. He notes there aren't any non-telepaths, so it may not work for him, but Jakar says there were once non-telepaths, but they were hunted to extinction, and any latent genes still present have never resulted in a natural-born telepath. Jakar hopes to use the drug as an untraceable weapon against the Centauri. Lindstrom also notes that it's never been tested on a Narn, and wonders who Jakar is going to get to use it, as it may be unpredictable. 3 guesses. Bester walks with Garibaldi, noting the silence, the lack of the background hum of minds he normally has. Garibaldi suggests this might help with his insomnia, but Bester says he doesn't have any. He says they both do the same thing, whatever he might think. They both protect Earth and have the same colour blood. In fact, he suggests the Corps protect the planet in ways he's not even aware of. Fair to say, perhaps. Jakar's quarters are wrecked. Clearly, he's taken the dust sample. The camera slowly tracks to his face, and his eyes are completely black, not their usual red, and he breathes Molari as he staggers to his feet. His vision is also distorted, and he struggles to keep out casual thoughts from passers-by as he lurches into Green Sector. A fixer named Ashi is being quizzed by Garibaldi and Bester. Bester, of course, unable to apply his usual techniques, but still having a psychological impact just by being in the room and applying intuition. Ashi may not be selling, but everyone has to go through him, it seems. And he spills all he knows when Bester intimates he knows what he's thinking anyway. So they now have leads, and Bester makes the wry observation that whilst his uniform and badge may be intimidating, aren't Garibaldi's too, for very similar reasons? As Batman would say, criminals are fearful individuals. In Londo's quarters, Veer is on tenterhooks waiting for Londo's views on his Minbar report. Veer, of course, has been thorough and truthful, and Londo says that is likely to get him sterilised. He proceeds to adapt the most negative views possible of observations that Veer sees as positives about the culture of the Minbari. Veer thinks it is utterly mad, up until Londo tells him to answer the door as he pours a drink. There is a thud, and when Londo asks what he's dropped, he turns to see Jakar holding an unconscious Veer aloft by his neck, and his glass drops to the floor in terror as Jakar advances on him, releasing Veer. The scene shifts. Bester and Garibaldi are on stakeout, waiting for the dust shipment to arrive. Garibaldi thinks they should have gone to Jakar, but Bester quite sensibly thinks it's better to cut the problem off at the source, then the rest will fall into place. The conversation includes the usual sparring between them, as the targets then arrive, and they use sonics to incapacitate them long enough to disrupt the deal and deal with the more trigger-happy elements. 2 briefcases full of dust are their reward, tying the dealer to the supplier and the goods. Bester notes that they should have got it before anyone else got hurt. But Londo is far from being not hurt, as Jakar has beaten him and is now preparing to end his mind to Londo's sheer horror. And he's right to be afraid. The dust is working exactly as it's supposed to, giving him access to Londo's past as he's assigned to Babylon 5, not on merit, but because no one else wanted the position given what happened to the first 4 stations. This causes bitter laughter from Jakar, who then demands to know his secrets, and his conversations with Morden appear in flashback. He comes to realise that Londo is at the heart of it all, even though he protests that he has cut off relations with Morden. Jakar screams that he wants to know who he is, and that he will take it from him neuron by neuron. Londo's life unravels at speed in front of us, until a voice declares that that is enough, and Londo is no longer in the mindscape. Jakar asks who the voice is. A Narn, bound by his wrists, hangs from a tree. I am who I have always been. Father, says Jakar. There follows an exchange in which Jakar's father explains to him that it no longer matters who started what. There is more at stake now than the death of the Centauri and the Narn, the death of everyone. If Jakar wishes to honour him, then the Narn must turn away from the self-destructive cycle they are trapped in with the Centauri, and look beyond that, to realise that if they do not help others prevail, they will be dead anyway, and there will be no one to remember their name. He therefore encourages Jakar to be something nobler and greater, which will be a harder path than he has known before, an opportunity that the universe does not often offer. Jakar asks why now, why not sooner? The voice responds that he has always been here, and finally Kosh reveals his angelic Narn form as he vanishes, his message of hope and purpose delivered. In the real world, Jakar breaks down into tears, and Kosh leaves the room, probably unseen. Londo should recover, but both he and Veer are pretty banged up. They share a moment through the glass in medbay, Veer noting that he will need him. Jakar is sentenced to 60 days in the station brig, despite Sheridan interceding, because it was clear that the influence of dust notwithstanding, he specifically targeted Londo. Garibaldi offers him the Book of Jaquan for his incarceration, but he tells him to hold on to it, as he is now nearer its source. Veer gets Londo his customary hot jala as they try to recover in his quarters, although Veer has been recalled to Minbar by Centauri Prime, which Londo is actually pleased about, because it means they're taking notice of him. Londo says he should never let them think of him as a joke, and Veer reassures him that he won't. Garibaldi escorts Mr. Bessis to his ship at speed, as the sleepers are likely to wear off soon, and Bessis says he enjoyed working with him, but Garibaldi hopes there will never be a repeat performance. As he exits, another Psychop arrives, and Bessis notes ironically that he could have done with her turning up 2 minutes sooner, but that they'll complete their business on the station another time. He goes on to note that it was actually Psychor who developed Dust, but expresses disappointment that it has yet to produce a stable, good quality telepath from a normal, although he's happy enough now that it's out of alien hands. In his cell, Jakar quietly contemplates one phrase in particular that Kosh told him: "Some of us must be sacrificed, if all are to be saved." So, I was quite excited hitting this one of the episodes that I did have a clear recall of before watching it again. But I think perhaps looking at the series now, I can see more significance in this than I did back in the day, because then I was all focused on Jakar messing up Londo and getting blacked out eyes to do it, but actually that's utterly irrelevant in some respects. What matters here is Kosh opening a door for Jakar that he can either choose to walk through or close. And walking through it brings no great promise of reward, because Kosh at no point suggests that both the Centauri and the Narn aren't on their way out, as he's suggested before. All he's really saying is that as you are going out, you can choose to make a difference, and then you will be remembered by those you helped save. Otherwise, everyone loses. So, this is a massive turning point for Jakar's character, and he knows that what he's being told is right, because he asks why he hadn't had this revelation shown to him before, because he knows he could have turned away from this destructive path. But just as when Sheridan's mind grew quiet enough to link to Kosh in Season 2, Kosh heard Jakar now almost for the opposite reason, because his mind had been expanded by the dust, such that Kosh was able to physically find him and bring him back from the edge. I actually wonder if Jakar would have put two and two together had he been in Londo's mind a little longer, because he even saw the shadow ships in Londo's future dream as he was in his mind, and I wonder if Kosh actually wanted to block him from that for the time being as well. As we know, the Vorlons are not beyond a spot of manipulation if they think it will get their goals achieved, and here we have a shining example of that. You look back at where Jakar came from, all brash and overconfident in the Narn regime's ability to stick it to the Centauri in the first season, to see him here now just a couple of years down the line, it's a really remarkable character progression. Now he has 60 days to sit and think about what he's seen and how he wants to try and guide his people. Just really, really great story writing. And of course, into this mix we have Londo and Veer getting their collective heads handed to them by Jakar, demonstrating just how strong the Narn are physically. As Londo said, Veer had zero chance at stopping him when he was in full rage machine mode. Perhaps Dust gives you a physical edge as well, because it's operating on your brain's chemistry so much, as the human affected did seem to be quite vicious as well, and super strong. Nice that Sheridan went to bat for him as well in court, but the judge was having none of it, and Jakar was actually happy to admit his guilt, because it was part of the journey for him this episode. Let me not overlook others here. Ivanova actually issued an order to kill Bester. He's no one's favourite outside the Corps, but that was quite a shocking moment that I hadn't remembered prior to rewatching it. Her reasoning is quite objective in fairness, but it's informed by her history with the Corps, and as Sheridan notes, there is another option there to be used. I think what it highlights is that Ivanova is not afraid of making really tough calls when she has to, if there was ever any doubt about that. But here that's writ large, with Sheridan just barely stopping her jumping off the cliff. We don't see a lot of him, but Lanier is quite assertive in his interaction with the Drazi dialogue and telling Veer that getting Londo to Minbar will not help him. He too has matured from his arrival on the station when he wouldn't even meet Delen's eyes. Now he's actually stepping up and being almost ambassadorial himself, which is good to see. Veer also shows growth here in his own way, even if Londo feels he still has a lot to learn. The fact that he clearly feels at ease on Minbar highlights how different he is to a lot of Centauri. We already know that, of course, but it seems that Centauri Prime is now aware of him, and he is, after all, thanks to Londo's intervention, representing his entire world on Minbar, almost a mini-ambassador in his own right. And of course we have this fascinating good cop, bad cop routine between Bester and Garibaldi, the former being everyone's favourite villain as ever, but being knocked down to normal status for the duration of the episode, with ensuing hijinks between him and Mr. Garibaldi, and the revelation that Dust actually came out of cycle, so this whole thing is their fault. And the interesting thing is that, even without his ability active, he's still able to play mind games, here constantly drawing parallels between his methods and Mr. Garibaldi's methods, to make us consider whether they really are so different in what they're trying to achieve, and how they go about it. Except, of course, it is a charade when all is said and done, because the Earth Mr. Bester would like to see is very different to the one Mr. Garibaldi is trying to preserve. It just happens that these things align from time to time. Entertaining to see Mr. Bester get stymied at the outset by the Minbari telepaths en masse. I'd forgotten they had to whip up that many to give themselves a fighting chance, and it does make you wonder whether there's a degree of equivalency among the races that have them. It just occurred to me that Jakar did meet Mr. Morden in Signs and Portents, and asked him the "what do you want" question. And while that isn't referenced here, you could probably look into him off the back of this if he remembers it in enough detail. Maybe that will shake itself out down the line, I don't know. Maybe Jakar will believe that Londo has genuinely cut ties with him as he protests he has. Again, it just depends on whether Jakar recalls and or believes that. At the end of the day, Dust is clearly a very blunt activation of a latent gene. It's not going to give you a huge amount of psionic skill, it just gives you a big psionic fist for a short while. Jakar's eyes are back to normal as Kosh is leaving. I think this is one of those episodes that demonstrate the real depth of characterization on the show in the way it gives Jakar this choice. I'm sure it would have confused the hell out of anyone coming cold to this episode though, because they wouldn't understand the Kosh element that's what Jakar's father appearance actually is. But we're several years in now, and it is in the nature of this show that the more you put in, the more you get out. Yes, that means some people will never get into it full stop because they pick a poor episode to try and onboard themselves, but I think that's a calculated risk to make the concept work as a whole. I think nowadays, with box set binging being a thing, you can easily start at the front end and work through. And in that sense, Babylon 5 was so far ahead of its time because its structure is no longer the handicap some people might have originally perceived it to be. So it will be really interesting to see if there's a general resurgence in interest, because I think it remains one of those strangely neglected yet incredibly high quality shows. I guess that as with anything else, it just won't be everyone's cup of jala. Right, that's a huge buffer of one episode reasonably firmly established. But I think these videos are going to be getting much longer before much longer, so that may not last. Catch you for the next one.